Hi, this is Robin, and this is a workshop on how to relight photos in Photoshop with no 3D filters. So it is part 2 of my lighting tutorials. Now, if you've tried to follow my older Photoshop relighting tutorials from a couple years ago and couldn't find the 3D lighting effects that I show, you're not missing anything. Adobe removed them. So in this updated Relighting Photos Part 2 workshop, I'll show how to create realistic spotlight effects as well as cast shadows in Photoshop. And I will use workflows that work in the current versions of Photoshop. So that means no 3D filters required. We will build a spotlight with optional volumetric dust. And then because adding light isn't really enough on its own, I'll show how to build convincing faux cast shadows. And it's a technique that will work with the directional light, omni light, or virtually any relighting effect that you add, whether it was the ones I showed in part 1 of this workshop or here in part 2. So I'd say think of the shadow workflow that I'm going to show as a missing piece that makes your added lighting or faux lighting more believable. Now, each demo will stand on its own, so you can jump to whatever you're interested in. If you haven't seen my updated part 1 on relighting, it covers directional light, lens flares, and a glowing lit bulb effect. And again, those are also all 3D free. So I'd say check the description below this video for links to more information. So one of the things I wanted to mention here, and then I will jump right into demo number 4, is the demo numbering that I'm mentioning picks up from my associated part 1 of this relighting update. So that's why there's a number 4. You're not missing anything unless you go to part 1, then you'll see demos 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so let me pause for just a moment, be sure everything's set here, and then we'll go right into demo number 4. This is demo number 4, which is create a spotlight effect. And I'm also going to show some optional volumetric dust particle steps or a workflow for that in case you're interested. This image that I'm working with is from the stock site FreePic, and right there it's noted. And for either of the images that I'm going to use in this demo, if I have access to or rights to post the link to the video to the image, I will do so below the video in the description. Okay, so your first step in the workflow process is be sure your image is opened as a background into your layers panel. You'll note my layers panel's at the top, properties panel at the bottom, and I have my toolbar docked right, so just to help you follow me. Okay, now the one thing I do want to mention is I am just going to show a single spotlight and how to build a single spotlight because there are a lot of steps to this process. So you just repeat the process if you want to use multiple lights or if you want to angle lights from different directions. I'm going to be doing a top-down spotlight. Okay, so workflow phase number 1, as I said, this is multi-step, is to create the spotlight's outer light cone, as I'm calling it, for the beam of light. So first of all, first thing we always want to do is duplicate that background layer. So left click, drag it to the bottom of the layers panel to the add new layer icon, or Control it or Command J to jump up a copy and work on a copy. All right, now we're going to add an empty layer above the copy. Bottom of the layers panel, add new layer icon, that box with the plus. There's our empty layer. All right, so now this, as I said, is going to be the outer cone or beam of the spotlight. So I'm going to use the polygonal lasso tool to lay down the points for the shape for that beam. So on the toolbar, my polygonal lasso tool is under my lasso tool. So I just right click on that little arrow, and find the polygonal lasso tool, left click on that. So that is now the active tool. It looks like a little jig-jaggy lasso. So with that, I'm going to start at the top where the source of the spotlight would be and click, come down, click again. I'll just come over and keep it. You can round yours if you want to. I'm just going to go out beyond his script that he's holding here in his theater class. And then, of course, the spotlight goes from narrower to wider. So I'm just going to come to that shape, then and click again to put the point down. And then I'm just going to make a quasi-rounded. I'm not going to worry about it being perfectly rounded because I'm going to soften it. So I'm just clicking in a rounded shape. And then will you note here where my green highlighter is? As I get close to the endpoint to close that loop, a little circle appears at about the 5 o'clock position outside that green. You see it? So you need to have that little circle there in order to left click and create the selection of marching ants. Okay, so just be sure you complete the shape to make the selection. All right, so that's our outer spotlight beam shape. Now, we want to be sure that we're working on the toolbar with white as the foreground color. So you can either click on that two-headed arrow or press the X key, and that will reverse them. So make sure white is your foreground color because you want your beam of light to be white. I'm going to work with the gradient tool. So again, on the toolbar, that rectangle that looks like it's going from dark to light, left click, be sure it's active with the black behind it. Then each of these tools on the toolbar has options or settings across the top of the interface. So we want to come to the options bar to see what the settings are for the gradient. Be sure you're on the gradient. I prefer the new gradient versus the classic gradient. Then come over, this shows you the presets for the different gradients. You can click on that little arrow, and I want to be working with the white to transparent. That's this third one here, at least on mine. So look, see where it says foreground to transparent, that's what you want. So I'll left click on that and you can see it shows that right there. And then I want to be working with the linear gradient. So these are the different styles of gradients. The linear is the first one. You can see it's right there. Okay, and the next one's the radial. So we're going to work with the linear. So gradient, white to transparent, and then the linear gradient. Okay, so now once you get that set, you're going to come over back to your shape that you created. I like to start just outside the image and left click and then drag down. Okay, so you can see it's doing a gradient of white, so it's not a solid white. The light is falling off as it goes down the spotlight, as it would in a real situation. Okay, so that is good. So now that we have that, we're going to convert this layer to a smart object. So let me just call this the outer cone. Outer beam maybe is better. Okay. So then just come over into the empty layer over here, right click on that same layer, and we're going to convert it to a smart object. So left click to convert to smart object, and you get that little icon that shows you that now it is a smart object. So this is much sharper and harsher than what a real spotlight would be. So we want to soften it. We're going to go to the top of the interface, and we're going to go to the filter menu, left click, come down to where it says blur gallery. So right below blur, blur gallery, fly out, and we're going to use the field blur. Left click on that. Okay, and you can see it's taken us into a different interface here. And what it has done is it will always put this little widget sort of right in the center of the screen. So you can left click in the center of that circle and move that widget. Okay, so I'm going to move mine up because what I want to do is do different levels of softness as we go down this spotlight. Okay, so now with that widget there in place, see this white rim? It's white and gray. If you right or left click rather on that white, you can drag it. And you'll notice as I drag it around, clockwise around that circle, it gets softer. Now, also watch over here. It's the same thing is happening on that. So you can work either on the slider over here or on the widget on the image. Personally, I prefer it here so I don't have to go back and forth. Okay, so we don't want to make this too soft at the top because this is the source of light. So as it comes out, it'll be a little bit sharper or more distinct, and then it'll get softer as it goes down. So let me just, and there's no formula for this, just do it to taste. Right, I think I'll start mine top one there. So now I'm going to put, so see that in my green highlighter, there's that little thumbtack and a plus symbol. That means you could put another pin if you left click. So you can put the pins wherever you want. So I'm going to put a pin here somewhere about in the middle, just left clicked. And so now I'm going to do it softer than I did up at the top. And I'm just watching the softness at the edges to get the softness I want. Yeah, that's not bad. Yeah, let me leave that there. Okay, and then again with my little pin icon here, I'm going to just come down and make it even softer. So again, it's not on him, it is on the layer with this beam of light. So towards the bottom, I'm just going to put another pin, and I'm going to do that softer than this one above it. You can see the numbers going up for the level I'm using. Okay, and you can see again, it tracks from the number here to here. So just do whichever you prefer. Okay, so I'm gonna, and if you want to reposition, it's just left click and move it up. Now what you will notice also is that when you place the pin, it will get sharp again. So you have to move it to get to the layer that you want. So that is all I want to do in terms of softening this outer beam right now. Top of the interface, I am going to click the box that says high quality. So check that on. What that does is it basically gives you a smoother edge handling along here. And I found at least that it gives you fewer artifacts, but it may slow the processing a little bit. So you decide whether it's worth it to you. Once you get those things set, by the way, I keep mine set on preview so you can see what's happening here. Left click OK and wait for it to process. Okay, so now it has taken us back to the Photoshop interface, and you'll see that now there are sub layers. So there is a mask layer that has been added, and then something that says blur gallery. So if you wanted to go back in and you said, oh, you know, I either did it too much and made it too soft, or I didn't make it soft enough, you could double click on that word and it will take you right back to your settings so you don't have to start all over again. So all right, I'm okay with mine, so I'm just going to hit cancel. But just to let you know, you can double click on those words blur gallery if you want to make some modifications to your settings. Okay, so now with this outer beam all set, I want to change the blend mode for that layer to screen. So right above it here, this is where the blend modes appear, and normal is the default. Click on that little down arrow, you'll see all the different blend modes. I want to put mine on screen, left click. Okay, and then the other option is, so I want to keep this with a bright, hazy kind of a spotlight look. If you want a more harsh look where you don't see all that beam, then you can use a different blend mode. You can come over here and use overlay. See, so watch, so his face definitely got like more, and so if you don't want that beam, but you want a bright light on somebody, you can go with overlay. I want the soft hazy light, so I'm going to stick with screen for mine. Okay, so then you can also, since this is still pretty intense, you can come right across from the blend mode and you can lower the opacity. So again, you can click on that little down arrow and get a slider if you want, or you can just left click on the word opacity and drag, keeping that mouse button depressed or whatever. If it's on a stylus, you'd be keeping it depressed to drag. And again, no formula. I'm just doing this to my taste. It might be different than your taste. Do it to what you like. And again, this is the outer beam. I just do it in small increments and then look and see what. It's not bad. I'll leave mine there. Okay, because it's a nice soft light there. Okay, so that was work phase 1 to get that outer beam. So now we're going to go into workflow phase 2, where there's usually a brighter cylinder at the center of the beam. So workflow phase 2, we're going to create that light cylinder inside the beam. So again, now we're going to add an empty layer above this, bottom of the layers panel, add new layer icon, that box with the plus, and this is going to be the central beam cylinder. I like to label because once we start getting a lot of steps, we'll know where we are. Okay, so this time we're going to use a different tool. So I'm going to use, rather than the polygonal lasso tool, let me put it back to lasso. We're going to use the rectangular marquee right here. It looks like a dashed rectangle. And with that tool active, I'm going to drag down. So just like I created a shape with the polygonal, I'm going to create a shape with the rectangular marquee. And I'm just going to drag it down through the center of the beam. And you can make it narrower if you want, just do it to taste, try different things. Okay, so now again, it's going to be the same kind of process. So on the toolbar, we're going to use the gradient tool. White is the foreground color. White to transparent linear gradient. Okay. And again, we're going to convert this to a smart object. So right click in the empty area, convert to smart object. You get that little icon that tells you it's now a smart object. And again, we're going to go back up to the top of the interface to the filter. Oops, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm wanting to blur this before we even do it. So with that gradient, we're going to, again, drag down. And I want that to come a little bit lower because that's sort of that central beam. Okay, and release. All right, so now we're going to convert that to a smart object. There we go. I'll turn this off here. And now we're going to go to the filter gallery and come down to the blur gallery, field blur. We get that icon in the center again. And I'm going to take that little widget and I'm going to move it up to the top of the blur, to the central cylinder blur, and soften that. And I think, I'd say make yours maybe a little bit narrower than I did mine. I'll leave mine there. Okay, and then I want it softer down here above his head too. So click to put another pin there. And you can see it immediately sharpens it up again. So you do have to move the white bar, the white ring, to soften it up. Yeah, I think I made that too thick. So definitely make your central cylinder narrower than I made mine. I'll leave mine there. Okay, want to be sure it's on high quality, or again, it's optional, but I like mine on high quality, and then click OK to process. All right, so now we're back in the layers stack again, and I'm just going to get rid of this because that was a duplicative step there. Okay, so now we have the gradient fill, and this is for the central cylinder. Hope that wasn't confusing to you. So again, I want to lower the opacity again because I think that's a little bit much. So I am going to come over to the top of the layers panel to opacity. Sorry, I'm just looking at seeing where I want to be here. I'm debating whether I want to do with the blend mode or not, but I don't think I do. Yeah, and so that to me, no, that's too defined. Okay, I'll leave mine there for now. So I have mine set at 54, but again, just do it to taste for the opacity for that central cylinder. And I'm just not going to do, it doesn't need it, so I'm not going to do a change the blend mode there. Okay, so now we have the outer beam and the inner beam or the inner cylinder. So now the workflow phase 3 for this spotlight is to add the light source, to add the actual spotlight up at the top. So again, let me just get off of this so we're not confused here. And we're going to add another empty layer, bottom of the layers panel, right there. And this is going to be the actual spotlight at the top, or the light source, let me call it that. So that's where the light is coming from. And again, I'm doing top down, but you could do this from angles if you want to. If you wanted to be even adding a different light, so have a spotlight on him and then another one over here angled on them, you could do that. Or you could do multiple top downs, whatever it is, that you want to try or work with. Okay, so we have our empty layer for our light source. So now I want to use a white brush to create that. So toolbar, go to the brush tool, right there, it looks like a paintbrush. And then I want it to be a hard brush. So again, because there's options for each of these tools, in the options bar for the brush tool, I want to come and click on this little tool tip or brush tip presets here. And I want one of the hard brushes for mine. So what can I use? Maybe just a sort of intermediate size here, nothing too small. Okay. And then what I want to do is, because this is an oval shape, so you wouldn't have a perfectly round light at the top, it's going to be an oval if you look up. So I want to make my brush, which is circular. You can see the shape of the brush here at the upper left is circular. I want to make my brush more oval so that it will look right for that light. So these little circles are handles you can use to adjust, click and adjust the shape. And then if you want to reposition the shape, you click on that little arrow and left drag, okay? So mine can stay horizontal. Oops, there we go. But I do want it not too rounded. Okay. All right, I'm not going to worry about being too perfect. You spent more time than I am trying to do in the oval here. Okay, so now as we come across, we've got a hard brush. We've got it set to the shape that we want. And I want the hardness on mine to be altered also. So I'm going to, sorry, the opacity. My mind is going here. The opacity, I want it to be 45, 50%, about half of the current strength. All right, let me leave mine there. Oh, maybe a little down. Yeah, that's all right. Okay, and then I want it to be on a flow that's a lot less because I don't want to be laying. So the opacity means you're not going to put it down as a really opaque, solid, dark white. You're lessening how intense that white is going to be. And then by lowering the flow, you can build it up gradually if you want to. So I'm going to left click and drag to make the flow less than the opacity even. So maybe 30 to 40%. Yeah, I'll leave mine there. Okay. All right, and so now what I want to do is, let me just open this up again so that we can see the size. I want this brush to fit across the size of this beam because it's going to have to be the light source. So coming back here to the upper left on the size, I'm just going to get this bigger to start. And then I'll come out and adjust it out here. Okay, so that's good. I'll click on the options bar to close that. So I don't know if you can see, but inside my green highlighter, the black line is the brush size, so it's not stretching all the way across. So I'm going to use the right bracket key and just tap it a few times. There we go. Until that fits. And maybe I'll just do it one less. There we go. And again, you spend time to get yours the way you want. I think this actually can be a little bit more compressed for mine. Okay. And then what we're going to do is just tap for the desired brightness. So you do it as bright as you want. Tap, tap. That's not bad. Okay, I did 3. You can do as many as you want. And then what I'm going to do on that layer is I'm also going to, again, same layer, blend mode, I'm going to change that to a linear dodge right here. So it's in the lighten category. Linear dodge, add, left click. Okay. And optionally, you could add a Gaussian blur just to soften that up. So why don't I show you that too? So again, same light source layer, top of the interface, filter menu, come down to blur, fly out to Gaussian blur, left click, and you've got the Gaussian blur interface here or dialog box. And then I want to soften that light up. So I'm going to pull, add more pixels. So look, if you come real far right, it softens it a lot. If you go left, it keeps it harsh. So I want to soften it somewhat. Too much. Okay, I think for mine, I'm going to leave it there. So mine's at 9.8, but you can also click on there and type a number if it's not, if it's just going in fixed increments and you want to do someplace in between, you can just type over that. Click OK to accept it. All right, so now we've got the light source at the top of the spotlight. So we're pretty good here on the spotlight. Let me just be sure I put everything back to neutral settings. So if I come in, I don't get confused. All right, left click there. All right, so now the next thing is that we need to copy the subject to his own transparent layer, because when light shines down from a spotlight like this, it doesn't just hang up in the air. There's light that hits the ground and contact points on the ground. So that's what we need to do. And we need to have them underneath or behind him in terms of Photoshop layer type of language. So let me put this back up here for now. So we need to get him on a layer so he can be blocking and he won't get affected by what we put on the ground. All right, so to do this, what we have to do is come to the object selection tool on the toolbar. That's that box with the arrow going into it. Left click on that to make it active. I want the background background copy layer active, because these are all empty layers, so there would be nothing to select on them. So left click and make your background copy layer active temporarily so that we're on a content layer. And then we want to go up to the options bar for this object selection tool here where my highlighter is. And where it says select people, left click on that and let it detect people in the scene. Okay, so it has detected that there are 4 people here. And if you hover over each of them, you'll see that they have selected the people and you can highlight them. So yes, he is the one we want to work with. So I'm going to left click on him Then you have the choice. You can select the entire person, or as I hover, you'll see it's selecting portions of him. Okay, so I just want, because I'm going to be working with the ground, I only need to select the lower part of his body. So I don't need his upper clothes. I want his lower clothes and his shoes. Okay, so you can see that it has automatically put a highlight around those areas. So for me to make a selection of those, I want to click apply and wait. And now we have the marching ant selection just of his lower body. I want to come back to this light source layer. Hold on just a moment. I'm going to get a drink of water. That's why I'm pausing here. Okay, actually, I realize that will be blocking the light. So I'm going to come back to the background copy. Sorry for the confusion. So with that part of his body still highlighted as a selection, you're on the background copy layer. We're going to copy that to its own layer. So Control or Command J to jump him up to his own layer. So there he is. So we're going to call this the subject. I'll just call it lower body, because the light has to go beneath him. Okay. So now, while we're on that layer, let me move this up so we can see what we're doing here. I want to put an empty layer underneath him so that he will hide whatever we're doing on the ground. So you're on that lower body or subject. If you're working with an object, then it would be whatever. Let's say you're working with a vase or a bowl. You'd have it copied there. The rest of your background would be here, and you'd be putting just the bowl here so you could put that contact light underneath it. With this layer highlighted, we're going to press Control or Command and hold it and click on the Add New Layer icon, the box with the plus. And by pressing Control or Command while you do that, it puts that new layer below your current layer versus above it. Okay, so now this is going to be the spotlight contact, ground contact. And again, because in Photoshop, as you go up the layer stack, whatever is above will cover what's below as long as it's opaque. That's why we want him above the light that we're putting on the ground. Okay, so now again, we're going to be modifying a brush to create this ground contact. So again, brush tool from the toolbar, looks like a paintbrush, and we're going to again use a hard, narrow, oval white brush. So you want white as the foreground color. All right, and I'm going to reuse that brush. So you can see here's the prior brushes I've used. So I'm going to left click on that and reuse that brush again. I'm going to make the opacity again about roughly half current opacity, so 50 to 60%. Let me do, well, leave it there. All right, and then the flow I also want to lessen, so I'll just left click on the word flow and drag, or you can pull that little arrow down and just pull a slider, whichever you prefer. I'll leave my flow there. Okay, so now, just like we had to increase the size to fit the top of the spotlight, now you have to increase the size of the brush at the bottom. But this time, you have to follow the line. So I'm just going to use my highlighter here to show you where I am. So follow the implied line of the outer beam of the spotlight to determine the size there. So I'm going to use my right bracket key and just keep tapping it till this starts looking like it would roughly fall the size of the outer beam of the spotlight. Okay, and then this is way too wide and oval, so we're going to come back over to the upper left to the brush tip preset thing. Really click on this arrow right down there to open the brush presets again. And again, on the shape of the brush, I'm going to left click and just squeeze this to a more narrow beam. Let me see how that, nope, still a little wide. Yeah, that's a little better. Okay, and I think I'm going to angle this a little bit more just because he's angled and the spot might. And it's trial and error to get these things, okay? And again, you take more time than I'm taking. Get yours the way you like it. I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger for the beam. Okay, so now I'm positioning it so that his feet are kind of in that beam. And I'm going to left click. And again, you can do it as dark as light as you want. I might just do it the one time. Well, let me do it just to be sure that you can see it. I'll leave it a little brighter than I might typically do it. And in fact, maybe what I will do here is I'll make it a little smaller. I clicked once for the outer one, and because there's this inner cone, I'm just gonna make that a little brighter in the center. Okay, let's do it that way. So now I'm going to, first of all, put this back to my neutral tools. For me, I always like to go back to the lasso, but first let me put this back. Okay, I'm going to go back to the lasso. Okay, so now we are going to convert this layer here, this spotlight ground contact, to a smart object by right-click in the empty area. Convert to smart object. Got the icon that says it's now a smart object. And then we're going to do the same thing we did up above. We're going to work with the field blur. So go to the top of the interface, to filter, blur gallery. Come across to field blur, left click. Okay, and again, you get that little widget in the center. So I am going to drag that down, like click in the center, that white circle. I'm going to drag it down here, and I'm going to soften this up because again, it wouldn't be that harsh. And again, just do it to taste. It's too much. I'll leave that one there. And then I'm going to click with this pin. See the pin in the center there? Just in the center here again, and just soften that up a little bit. It can be a little bit more dense than the ones at the edges. And then I think I'll click here again just to make sure I'm softening that up. Okay, I think that's all right. Then I'll check up at the top of the interface, high quality, click OK to accept. Wait for it to process. And again, the reason for making it the smart object is if it doesn't look just the way you want, when you get back here, then you can double click on the words blur gallery and go back in and adjust your settings. And again, I'm just going through this a little quickly. I'd spend a little bit more time to get this the way I like, but I just want you to get the process. So then again, this I think can have a little bit lower opacity. So top of the layers panel, come across from the blend modes to opacity, left click or click that down arrow for the slider and drag to whatever you prefer for the opacity. Let's do it to taste. Okay, I'll leave mine there. So I have mine at 74%, but you can do it more or less to taste. But you do, I think, want it to be a little bit more dense in the center. So you could even do it as two separate layers if you want, so that it is controlled separately. It's up to you. Okay, so that was the spotlight ground contact. So now the workflow phase 5, I told you this was a lot of steps, is to add a layer above the layer where we're at now with the ground contact, because with the light coming down from the top, he's going to be casting a shadow down here between his legs. So we want to have the cast shadow layer, right? So we're going to use a brush to do this. So again, we're going to need an oval brush for the toolbar. Brush tool, right there looks like the paintbrush. I want to, over on the options bar here, lower the opacity, again by about half. These are all roughly in the same amounts that I'm reducing them. You can experiment and see what you prefer. And then the flow, again, because flow helps you build up versus just in one click, it's all at the same intensity. You can start low and build. So the lower the flow, the more clicks you can do to build something, build up a strength or an appearance of a color or a light or whatever. Let's stay in the 40% range. Okay. All right. And then come to the brush tip over here at the upper left. And again, I want a hardness of, I don't know, here's the hardness here, maybe 30%, a third. I don't want it too hard of a brush. I don't want it too soft as a shadow between him too. I don't know, let me leave it around 31% and I'll see if that's going to do it. Okay, and again, because it's going to be a narrow, it's his body casting the shadow down, we need this to be pretty thin. So I'm clicking on the shape handle here in the upper left, and his feet are angled. So I'm going to use the arrow to angle shadow, faux shadow, to match the angle of his feet. Okay, I think it could be narrower. It's a little too narrow. Okay, and it could be a little bit smaller. So I'm looking at where his elbow is coming down and also kind of where the script is coming down here to help determine, just sort of drawing mental lines down to the ground. And I'll use the right bracket key to get this where I want. Okay, I think that'll maybe be good enough. All right, so I want this to fall kind of right between his feet. So I've positioned that, and again, I will just click. I will unclick. Be sure you've got black, it's a shadow, as your foreground color, so you can either press the D key for the default, or the X key if you wanted to swap them, or use the double-headed arrow. All right, let's do a shadow as a black. And again, you can tap, place the shadow. I'll do it pretty dark so you can see where it is. Okay, and then again, you could lower the layer opacity over here on the right if you want to in the layers panel. All right, so I lowered it just a little bit. I lowered it by about 10% there. Okay, so now when you draw shadows like that, usually if you look closely at shadows, there is, I guess, another thing. It's a contact line or something. It's a little darker closer to the object than it is further out. as the shadow goes out, it's less intense. So I want to, again, with the brush tool, this time I'm going to go back to the soft brush and make sure it's on the default. And I'm going to keep the hardness maybe in that same 30% area again. And I'm going to lower the opacity by about a third. So I don't know, 30 to 40% maybe. See how it goes. Okay, so I've got the soft round brush, but I have it set at a hardness of around 25 to 30%. Opacity is at 33% or 30%, whatever. And I'm leaving my flow at full flow for now to see. Okay, so I'm going to make this bigger. I'm using a controller command with the plus sign just to make this bigger. And you can see this is a very low res image as a stock photo. Okay, so we need to clearly make this brush a lot smaller. So I'm going to use the left bracket key. The brush is the white. And then this is going to be the cast shadow. That's what we just did a moment ago. And then I'm going to add an empty layer above that. So bottom of the layers panel, box with the plus. This is going to be the foot contact shadow. So this is going to be like just below his feet, and I'll make that brush a little bit smaller there. Okay, so now I am just going to paint along the edge of his foot. You can see, hopefully, that it is putting a little bit darker shadow just under his foot. And the reason it's not going over his foot is because we are under his lower body. So that's why we keep that above here. And then same thing here. So you can overlap the brush because it's painting underneath. And I'll come out a little bit further than you might need to, just so you can see that it's there. Okay. And in real life, that's what happens. It would be darker, closer. I think maybe what I'll do is on this cast shadow layer, I'll make it a little more tense just so that it blends a little better. There we go. Okay, so now we have added in this workflow phase 5, the contact light from the light beam, a cast shadow, and the contact shadow from the subject. And again, if yours is an object, you do the same kinds of things for that. So now the next thing we have to do is, because again, he wasn't in a spotlight when he was in the original photo. So we want to darken parts of his body that would also be in shadow because they're below where the light is hitting his body and coming down to his lower body. And excuse me for just one more moment. I'm going to take another drink. Hold on. Okay, I'm back. So now we want to darken this area, as I said. So we are going to duplicate this layer right above that includes his lower body, the legs and the feet. So we can just do a Control or Command J or left click and drag that to the Add New Layer icon, and then we get a copy. And then what I want to do on this layer is, so maybe I'll just change this and label this shadows on lower body. Okay, so we still have the original lower body selection. This is going to be the shadows, and that's the active layer. So I want to work with levels to add that layer, to add those lower body shadows. So a Control or Command L brings up the levels dialog box. And I'm going to be working on output levels down here at the bottom, so not on the histogram, down on the output levels here. And that will help to do this darkening that we do. So I'm going to pull, because I want it darker, I'm going to pull the white handle here to the left and watch the image. You see it getting darker. And again, it's only happening in this area here because this is all that is selected, is the lower body. Just want to be sure it's not too dark. All right, let me leave mine there. Just, I want it dark enough so that you can see that something has happened. So once you get yours to a level of darkness that you think is appropriate for a shadow in that situation or whatever situation you're doing, then you click OK to accept it. All right, and now we want to hide it because his entire leg isn't in shadow. The spotlight is still going to hit certain parts of his body. So we want to add a black layer mask to this layer to completely hide what we just did and then paint it back in selectively. So to do that, you press Alt or Option with this layer active and click on the layer mask icon, which is the box with the circle. And now we have a black mask and the mask is active with the white frame. So you can see it's stayed back the way it was before we darkened it. It's on the bright. So now we're going to keep working just on the mask, make sure that white frame is around there. We're going to use white to reveal where that darkness is. And I want to use a soft, kind of a medium flow brush. So toolbar, brush tool, come to the options bar at the top, and I've got the soft brush as the one that I have right now. And I want to, let's see, we're in white. I want to make sure it's sort of a medium flow with this. So let's reduce the flow by maybe 50%. See how that goes. So I want it to show up, but I don't want it too dark. Right, so we've got soft brush tool, white foreground color, soft, and medium flow. Okay, and a frame around the mask because that's what we're painting on. So we want to reveal where the shadow would be. So again, out here there could be some spill from the light, so it's more the inner leg. And I want to make my brush a little bit bigger inside that right bracket key there. Is that the highlighter? His shoes would be darker, but the tips would be white from the reflection. Building up his arm is in front of here, so there'd be some more shadow there. Some shadow under the sweater. Shoes and his ankle would be darker because they're under the pants. Just trying to get the logic of this one. So I went a little far, so I'll use the X and bring back some of the reflection from the light with the black. Okay, so I'm going to say that, yeah, see? So you can see that it added some shadow. And if you want less shadow, then you would work with the black. Bring back more of the white. Okay. And I'm just clicking the eye icon on the layer off and on. See how it looks. All right, so I will leave mine like that. So now we have a shadow cast on the lower part of his body. And I will put my tools back to my default places. So now those steps, those 5 phases, I realize it's a lot of steps, but you can go through it either faster once you get used to it, or just take your time. It's something you just kind of noodle with and experiment with to get it to look the way you like. But we went from, this is our basic spotlight that we've built here. And you can see, I mean, it's definitely a lot more steps than working with the 3D filters they used to have in Photoshop. But you can have a lot more control here too, so you can build it the way you like. So looking at the original to the faux spotlight. And again, you can adjust these things to taste. And as I said, if you prefer to not do the hazy spotlight, then you can do it with the overlay blend mode, where I use screen and make it just a harsh light. So that is the end of the basic spotlight effect, those 5 workflow phases. Now I can show you, if you like to keep doing things and playing with this, an optional approach that you can use to add volumetric dust. So when you see spotlights or just lights or lamps in general, you often see little dust particles in the air floating around. So that's what I'll show you how to create if you want to do it. It's definitely an optional step. I'm going to pause and get a drink again. Hold on. Okay, so now to make this volumetric dust effect, we're going to add a stamp layer at the top of all of these steps that formed the spotlight and the ground light. So to do the stamp layer, I usually like to add an empty layer, which is the box with the plus, and then do the claw maneuver. So press and hold simultaneously Shift, Control or Command, Alt, Option, and E. And that basically merges all those layers without collapsing them. This is the stamp layer. Okay, above that stamp layer, I'm going to add an empty layer. So bottom of the layers panel, add new layer icon, and we've got this. Now what we're going to do is create a custom brush to paint the dust into where the light beam is. So I'm going to make the foreground color on the toolbar white, because we want to paint with white dust. So I'll click that little 2-headed arrow, or you can press the X key on your keyboard to reverse them. So white is the foreground color. We're going to use the brush tool. There we go, on the toolbar, left click on that. Be sure it's active with the black behind it. And then on the options bar at the top of the interface, we're going to go to the brush tip presets, left click to reveal them. And I'm going to work with a soft round brush. And I want to use a size 5, and we don't have that here. So with that one selected, I'm going to change this size right here to a size 5 pixels. If it doesn't just go to it, I'm going to highlight it and type 5. Okay, so we want a 5 pixel soft brush. All right, now to do that, we're next going to click on this little manila folder here with the brush in it, which will take us to the brush settings. So left click on that, and we get the brush settings box pops up. Okay, so it pops up as already set to the 5 pixel that we had set it to up in the presets, and it's also on soft, so that's good. Now we want to adjust the spacing on here. So I want the spacing somewhere between 950 to 1000%, so I'll just take mine to the max. Now watch what happens. So this is the preset of how the brush looks when you paint with it, and that's how it would look with these current settings. Notice what happens as I pull the spacing to the right. Okay. It starts, so this is what's forming your dust particles because it's giving you all little individual dots. Okay, so that's why we need to adjust and create a custom brush. So when you paint with it, you'll get spread little dust dots like that. All right, so we also have to change some other settings here in the brush settings. So we've got the brush tip set. Next, going to click on the words shape dynamics, and we're going to make some changes there. So you want the size jitter to be at 100%. So click and pull that slider all the way to the right. We want the angle jitter also at 100%. Click and pull that to the right. The roundness jitter, you can give it a little bit of roundness jitter. It doesn't have to be a lot, so maybe around 25%, roughly, right? And then the minimum roundness, maybe I'll pull it up just a little bit from the default of 25. I'll make mine like around 30, just so I feel like we've made a setting here. Okay, so that's it for shape dynamics. Those are the settings that you need for this. Then next we'll click on the word, left click on the word scattering, and we're going to make the scatter also at the max, so 1000%. Be sure you've clicked on both axes. Got a check mark there. And then the count jitter, I think I'll put that at the max too. Yeah, okay, let's leave that there. Come down and on transfer, left click on the word transfer. And we want opacity jitter and flow jitter both at 100%. So left click and drag to the right, all the way to the right. And then we can turn off smoothing. So just click to uncheck smoothing. All right, and then if you want to, you can save this as a custom brush. If it's something where you think you would be doing this a lot, then you could save it. So you'd come back over here to that little down arrow at the upper left, go to the gear icon, click that, and you could just click to save it as a new brush preset. And when you click on that, it'll ask you to name it. So you could name it whatever you want and then save it. And it would put it at the bottom of your brush presets. I'm not going to do it because I've already created a brush preset for dust for myself. Okay, so this is going to be the dust particles. And this, as I said, is an optional step. You can decide for yourself whether it's worth the effort. Okay, so we're still on the brush. We've got those custom settings put together. So now what we want to do is paint inside this beam where the dust would be falling or where you would see it. And one thing I like to do is sort of give myself like a coloring thing, book color kind of thing, so that I color inside the lines with this. You don't have to do it, but you could use the polygonal lasso tool again and just click around the shape of the beam if you want to just be sure you stay inside the lines. I'm not going to bother to do it now, but sometimes I like to do that. So with that brush, that we've custom brush, you can see it there. You can see how tiny it is inside my green. I'm just going to start clicking and painting and dragging in the direction of the beam. Let me make this bigger so hopefully we can see where it's painting. Hopefully you can see some little dots, and you do just as little or as much as you want in there. You see it? Maybe I'll paint some out here just so you can see them better. And I'm just clicking and dragging, or else you can just go click, 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 whatever you want. And I'm gonna come over him too, because he's in that light beam. And it's very subtle. I mean, this is not, you don't want it to look like it's crazy dust, like he's not in a dust storm. Okay. So you can just paint as much or as little dust particle as you want into your spotlight. Okay, so now after you've done that, you can soften the dust. So again, we're on an empty layer with the dust, so this is not going to affect him or the rest of the scene. So you could soften the dust if yours is a little too harsh by going to the top of the interface to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And then I'd say use a very small radius because you don't want to lose what you've done. So 1 to 2 pixels. Yeah, I'll do 3, 1.3. Okay. And then just click OK. And that softens the dust that's on there. It's so tiny, you're probably not going to see it anyway if I show you on my screen, but try it on yours and you can see how it looks. And then for that layer, I will change that to a screen blend mode. So left click, down to screen there. And if you want, you could lower, if yours is too obvious for your taste, you could lower the layer opacity. Since mine is very subtle, I'm just going to leave mine on 100% for now. Now, the thing is, we just did it once like that. If you want, you can add some more layers of this with different sized dust. Maybe it would give it a little bit more dimensionality. So what I want to do is add another empty layer on mine. I'll show you the steps and then you can decide whether it's worth it or not for yours. So bottom of the layers panel, add a new empty layer. And I'm going to just relabel this here. So this is going to be the 5 pixel brush. So that's the 5 pixel dust particles. So I think what I'll do is one now at 25 pixels. And again, all of this is optional. Okay, so in order to get that, then we have to adjust the brush size. So I'm back over here and change this from 5, at the upper left here, to 25. I just highlighted it and typed 25 in the upper left under the brush tip. Click that down arrow to reveal it and then just change the size. That's all you have to change, and then click in the options bar. Be sure you're on the new layer for the 25 pixels, and then you just repeat that same kind of process. Let me zoom in so you can see it a little better. So we're painting again. So now you can probably see some of the more larger dots here, dust particles. And again, you decide how much you want or don't want. And I'm again going over him because he's in the spotlight. Okay, that's the 25. So again, follow the same step as before. On that 25, same 25 layer, top of the interface, filter, blur, Gaussian blur with the 1 to 2 pixels. Maybe I could do it some more on this since these are bigger. Soften them up, click OK, change it to a screen blend mode over here in the right layers panel. Okay, so that softens that up. And then let's just, and we could, you could lower the opacity if that's just way too obvious for you. So let's come across, for the first one I didn't because it really wasn't needed, but let's just say you want to make this more subtle. So I would do this probably in like the 40 to 70%, but just do it to taste. Okay, so mine's at around 42%. All right, so let's just add one more layer that's a little bit smaller than this and in between that. So bottom of the layers panel, add new layer icon. Let's do a 15 pixel this time. Dust particles. Again, it just helps to give it some dimension to the dust. Okay, and again, with that layer active, go to the top of the interface to the options bar, click on the brush tip down arrow, and we're going to change this from 25 to 15. and then click over on the empty part of the options bar. All right, and then again, with that brush, we'll just start painting. And as I said, I just follow shape and direction of the beam of light that I've created. Okay, let's say that's good enough. You don't need to watch me putting too many of those things in. And again, so same steps as before on that 15 pixel layer, top of the interface, filter, blur, Gaussian blur in the 1 to 2 pixel range. I think I'll leave it on the 2. Yeah, or a little bit more. It's up to you. Just do it to taste. Click OK. And then screen blend mode over here in the layers panel on the right. And then you could again lower the opacity, taste. All right, I'll leave mine there at around 58%. And that is it. So that is the extra optional steps of adding the dust particles to your faux spotlight. So if we come to the bottom, we've gone from the original image to the spotlight with dust particles. And that is the end of demo number 4, which was how to create a faux spotlight and optional dust particle effects with no 3D filters available. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to get set up for the last demo in this video because there were so many steps involved, which will be how to create a faux shadow. So hold on. So this will be demo number 5, and this is the final demo in this set from the 2 different parts of relighting videos, updated relighting videos. And in this demo, I'm going to show how to create a faux shadow because that will help when you do the faked relighting effects. Putting shadows in will make your lighting look more realistic. So I'm going to be working with this model in a studio, and I do not have the rights to share the link to this image. So hopefully you have some images of your own that you can work with. Basically what I did was I took out the shadow that was in this image so that I could have a blank slate to work with here. Okay, so again, you open your image into Photoshop. It comes in as a background layer. Duplicate and work on a copy, so you can left click and drag to the add new layer icon to get a copy, or on the background layer do a Control or Command J to jump up a copy that way. Now what we want to do is select the subject, and yours might be an object versus a subject, so that's fine. Just it'll be the same process. Okay, so you would either, I keep my contextual taskbar pinned up here so I can select subject there, but for that layer, you could also go to the associated properties panel and click on select subject there. Left click and wait. Okay, so Photoshop has made the selection of the marching ants around the subject. So now we want to copy that subject to its own layer. So that's a Control or Command J to jump it up. So this is the subject only. Okay, so just to turn off these layers so you can see. So it is just her on transparency. And because it's transparent, that's why you can see down below to the lower level layers to the background that's behind her. But she is on her own transparent empty layer. All right, now what we want to do is we want to add a drop shadow effect to her. So with that layer active, come to the bottom of the layers panel to where it says effects, left click on that, and come down that menu to where it says drop shadow and left click. Okay, so we get that layer style dialog box, and it's showing that we did select the drop shadow. So you want to be sure that the blend mode is multiply. If it's not, then click that down arrow and put it on multiply. You want to leave it on black, and you want the opacity at 100% right there. And you want to be sure that distance, spread, and size are at 0%. And then click OK at the upper right of that dialog box. Okay, so now you'll see it has created sub layers over here on the right in the layers panel. There's now an effects layer and there's a drop shadow layer. So you want to right click on the effects layer. So on the word effects, right click. And when it puts up that menu, come down to where it says create layer and left click. And you'll get this message box, which doesn't mean anything. So you can just click OK and accept it. And now you'll see that it's made a shadow below the subject only layer. There's now a layer for the drop shadow for that same subject. So let me just turn these off so you can see. So there's the drop shadow for her on its own layer, and it's below her. Okay, so now once we're going to work on this shadow layer here, be sure it's highlighted, and that's the active layer, the drop shadow layer. So now you need to either flip or rotate or whatever is needed for whatever direction of light. So for her, the direction of light that's coming in is coming in from left to right. That's where it's all bright and lit up on her body here. So the shadow will therefore then be cast from left to right also. That's going to cast the shadow in this direction. So we want to flip and rotate that drop shadow so that it falls in the direction that the light would be casting. Okay, so we're going to go to Free Transform, Edit, Free Transform, left click. So Edit is at the upper left. Come down that menu to Free Transform, and you get these bounding boxes with handles. And if you hover just outside the handle, you can rotate. You'll see that little two-headed arrow. And I'm going to assume that with the way the light is coming, it would be something like that kind of an angle for her. Okay, so then once you get it rotated, then you can left click inside and drag and just start lining it up. So in my case, I'm going to line it up with her feet. If you have an object, you would line it up with the bottom of whatever that object is. Now, this is very huge and that wouldn't be realistic. So she would be casting a narrower shadow. So then you can use the handles to left click on a handle and just push or redirect it so that the shape, and then click inside and move it so that the shadow is appropriate to the size of the subject. Okay, I'm making it so I just keep either clicking inside the pink box to reposition, but don't click on this widget in the center because that's a rotation point. So click any place but that inside the pink box to move it around, and then click on the handles to reposition. So you just have to do a little bit of back and forth to get it the way you like it. Okay. So then this is clearly, I've got it matched up with her right foot, but clearly this shadow is not matching up with her left foot. So then you can use some other transform tools to try to make that kind of adjustment. So again, upper left of the interface, edit menu, come down to where it says transform and fly out. And then there's a number of options that are useful for this. You can try distort or skew. Because of the misalignment of her feet and shadow, I'm going to try warp for mine. So try either distort, skew, or warp to try to push and shove. Okay, so again, I'm going to start pushing this back in this direction here. to try to get this under her left foot. There we go. And if this needs some nudging, you can do that. And again, I'm not going to be too perfectionist. I'm just trying to show you the steps. But the point is to push and shove and adjust the shadow so that it is coming from the correct source. Okay. And then I think I'll go back to edit, transform, distort, and just make this a little wider again. It would be coming from the tip of her shoe. Okay. All right. And again, I'd spend more time to get this right, but you spend the time, but you do have to do the transformation to get it to line up with the bottom of your object that is casting the shadow. Once you get it the way you like, you come to the top of the interface, here where my green highlighter is, and click that check mark, or you could hit carriage return to accept that. Now, there's a couple things that you could do here. I'm going to just temporarily duplicate this layer just to show you them, but I'm not going to keep it for mine. So I'm just going to drag that down, and I'm going to turn this off because this is the layer we want to keep. So here's the test layer. Now, in this image, you have to look at the quality of the light in your image. This is very hard light. So it's going to cast a very hard shadow. If you have softer light in yours, then you would probably want to soften up this shadow. So you could use the same kind of field blur that we looked at for the spotlight and in the part 1 video too for different softening of lights. So to soften this, if you have a softer light in your scene, you'd be on that active layer and you'd come up to Filter, Blur Gallery, Field Blur. You'll get this little widget here, and sorry if this sounds repetitive, but some people might only be looking at this demo versus the previous one. And you would just click inside the white circle and drag it down to what you want to soften. And for mine, I think I'll just put it between these two parts of the shadow. The shadow will be more defined closer to the subject and get softer as it goes away. So with this widget, this white ring around the outside controls the blur. So you can left click on it and make it, see, as blurry or as intense and defined as you want. Alternatively, up here in the upper right, this blur slider would control the same thing. So just if you watch the image, you'll see it's the same thing. Or if you watch the white, it'll be controlling this. I like to work on the widgets because then they're on the image. But my point being, if you have softer light than I have, you might want to soften your shadow. And this would be a good method to do that, okay? The other thing that you can do is, and let me then just accept this with the high quality, and okay, and say that's good enough. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be right for this image. That's why it's just temporary. The other thing you could do is, again, depending on the light in your scene, some of this might need to have drop off and fade off because it's not going to extend that far. So the way you can deal with that with cast shadows is to use the gradient tool from the toolbar. So come down to the gradient tool, so this rectangle that goes from dark to light. Left click on that, and we want to have a white mask on that layer. So bottom of the layers panel, add a new mask with the layer mask icon. There we go. So that's revealing everything. That mask is active with that white frame around it. And we want to have this working with a foreground to background color for the gradient. So with that gradient tool active, come to the top of the interface. You want to be sure it says gradient. Then you select the preset for the type of gradient. And it should be this far left one is foreground to background. Yeah, there we go. So left click and make that active. And you want to be working with the linear gradient, which is this first little icon here. And I want to have a foreground to background. And we start here and just drag. So you can see that as you drag out with that gradient tool, it's fading it off because you're going from white, which reveals, and again, you're working on the mask, not on the shadow. So this is a way to fade out if your light is such, and you can move this little diamond in the center to just where the fade off is. Okay, so if you have different type of light than I have, where there would be shadows in your scene that are fading out, and you want your faked light to do the same, this is how you would do it. You'd click white foreground to black background, drag it out, white back, and then you can just either reposition these ends by clicking on them and dragging. And then you can use the diamond and click on that to drag as to where the demarcation is. Okay, so hopefully that is clear. So I will delete that layer for mine because that's not relevant. I have hard light here, but at least then you know how to soften a shadow if you want to. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, and maybe for mine, I think I'm going to actually lower the opacity because that's a little bit intense. So left click on opacity. Yeah, I think that's better like that. Okay. Shadows are not pure black, nowhere. So what we want to do is sample a color of a shadow here in the real scene and then have that transferred into this shadow so that it looks more realistic. So on the toolbar, I'm going to choose the eyedropper tool right here. It looks like a little eyedropper. Left click, make sure it's black. And here's some shadow in this scene here. So I'm just going to click there once. And now the foreground has been made that sampled color. So what I want to do is, again, with this layer still active, come to the bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer, which is the circle with the line through it, left click, come down to solid color. So you're adding a solid color adjustment layer. There we go. So you can see it's added that solid color to the entire background there. So we're going to say, okay, that's good. Now, clearly we've blocked the whole scene. We only want that color applied to the shadow. So the way that you would do that is to clip or attach that solid color just to the shadow. Press and hold Alt or Option. Start with your mouse or stylus, whatever it is, in this drop shadow layer and slowly move it up towards the demarc, the line between these two layers. There we go. So as soon as you get, as soon as you get to that in between layer, you'll see that box with the down arrow appear, and that's the clipping icon. Just clip it, and now you can see it. This color layer is clipped just to the shadow. There's a little down arrow that shows that. Let me see if I can show you this. So watch the shadow here on the image. You'll see it changes from the black to the dark blue that was sampled to match the shadows in the scene, okay? Right, we don't need to use that eyedropper again. So again, we want to do the same thing here in this image that we did in the prior demo. If you didn't see the prior demo, then I want to go through it again, which is when you have a shadow that's cast, there's always a contact point nearest to the subject or the object that's a little darker than the rest of the shadow. So we want to create that contact point. Okay, so now we want to be sure that we are back on the subject only layer. Left click and be sure that's highlighted. We want to add a layer under her so that any contact point, I mean, it really helps to plant the subject or the object by having that contact point. So we want to be sure it doesn't go over her feet or over whatever object or thing that you're working with. So we put the empty layer for the contact point under her. So on that layer, press Control or Command, come to the bottom of the Layers panel, click on the Add New Layer icon, and that by pressing Control or Command, it puts the layer underneath her. So this is going to be the contact point. Okay, so now with that there, I want to change that to a multiply blend mode for that layer to make it darker. Okay. And now I want to use a medium hard dark brush. So again, want to be sure I'm black as a foreground color on the brush tool. It looks like a paintbrush from the toolbar, and medium hard. So going to the top of the interface to the options bar for the brush tool, the brush tips, click down. Want to do a medium hard. So here's hardness. I don't know, maybe 65, 66 in that range. Let me do that. Okay. And now I want to paint under the fronts of her feet. So let me make this bigger. Again, you can see this is pretty low res image. All right, so again, my brush is the little black circle inside the highlighter. So I'm going to just paint to create that contact point. And I'm going to mostly go in this direction since that's where the light is casting. Okay, and again, I can paint over her shoe, and I'll just come out a little further than I might normally. I can come out a little, I can go over her shoe rather, because she's on an upper layer, so it's not going to paint over her foot. Okay, and again, I'd spend more time and make sure it looks a little better, but that's how you would get the contact point. And if you want, you could lower the opacity for that in the upper right hand layers panel a little bit too if you wanted to. Okay. Now, the other thing that we want to do is, again, she's going to be having some shadow on this side of her body. So optionally, you could add some more shadow over there. I honestly don't know if this one needs it, but I'll show you the steps if you want to follow it for yours. So let me first of all, let's be sure I'm back at my neutral tools here. Okay. All right, so we're going to go to the subject only layer, and we're going to duplicate that layer. So a Control or Command J is the easiest way to do that. So then that's a copy. And so now again, we want to work with output levels to darken her. So we're going to do a Control or Command L to bring up the levels dialog box. And we're going to work with output levels here, so not the histogram. And we're going to pull the white handle on the output levels towards the left because that would darken. By the way, just an aside, this is a good way for day to night conversions too, is working with output levels and pulling that white handle to the left. And you can just watch her and see, because this is not a formula. See if you see her darkening. Yeah, there we go. All right, I'm going to keep it subtle there. All right. And by using the output levels, what that really does is it helps reduce contrast as well as darken the area. So once you get yours where you like, you can click OK. So now I need to create a selection so that we work just with her on this. So we're going to do a Control and click on that layer. And that makes this selection a Control or Command, sorry. I'm on Windows. Control or Command, click on that layer. Because she's on a transparent layer, it makes a selection of her. And then with that active selection, I want to add a black mask of her to that layer because I want to hide what we just did and then paint it back selectively with white. So I'm going to hold Alt or Option, and I'm going to click at the bottom of the Layers panel on the Add New Layer Mask. And there we go. So it has blocked out what we did by making her black. Let me just show you that. So we are hiding the levels adjustment, and we can paint it back in with a brush. Okay. So I want to use a soft white brush. So white. Brush tool is active from the toolbar. I want to lower the flow here in the options bar at the top. So I'll just left click and drag to 80%, roughly in that area, 75, 80%. Okay, or you could click on that down arrow and pull the handle that way. Okay, and then I'm going to make the brush a little bit bigger. And again, the shadows would be falling on this side of her body since the light is coming from her right or camera left. So I can make the brush a little smaller. And if you can see, hopefully, where I'm painting, it's adding some shadow. This would cast shadow, so just to emphasize that shadow a little bit more. This side of her pants, I can make that the brush a little bigger with the right bracket key. This side would be casting some more shadow in here. Okay, and then when you make larger, the outer part of her hand would be, I'm using a left bracket to make the brush a little smaller. Orange shadow here. Left side of her foot and ankle would be a little darker. And same thing here. So the part away from the light is going to be a little darker. And again, because there's a selection, it's containing where I'm painting it. The active marching ant selection keeps you constrained to painting inside the selection. So I'm going to say that that's probably good enough just to get you the idea, and you can do what you want. All right, so once you get that finished, you can turn off the marching ant selection, Control or Command D, and let's just see. Yeah, so if you look at her, as I turn the eye icon for that layer off and on, you can see where we added some shadow to the side on her that is away from the source of the light. All right, so then let's just go down and maybe make her a little bit smaller and then show the before, all the shadow, and after. Before, after. So that is how to add faux shadows both to a ground or a wall or a tabletop, as well as on a subject. So just to recap, in this workshop, you learned 2 practical relighting workflows that work in the current versions of Photoshop. We've built a spotlight effect, and I also showed you how to do an optional dust particles effect for the spotlight. And then we also created a more believable faux cast shadows. And you can really mix these techniques, mix and match them with any different images of yours. If you would like to learn more about relighting, there is the part 1 to this workshop, which is my updated relighting part 1. And that's in my Photoshop lighting effects playlist. And that part 1 covers how to create directional light, lens flares, and a glowing lit light bulb effect. And again, they're all using the current 3D free, so no 3D filters available, methods for relighting an image. So together, these approaches should give you various ways to relight an image without relying on those discontinued 3D Photoshop tools. So I'd say just have fun experimenting and take care.